This documentary tells the story of the resettlement of communities affected by the Volta River project. We will meet Mr. Kwabla Kalitsi, the officer assigned responsibility of the Volta resettlement project. Mr. Louis Casely Hayford, one of the first engineers recruited to work on the construction of the Akosombo hydroelectric dam, and some of the team that worked on the resettlement project. We will also visit some of the resettled communities to meet the people who experienced the resettlement exercise for their stories on what happened. The need to resettle these communities became necessary when the dam in Akosombo, which was under construction, started impounding water. The resulting rise of the lake started to encroach on communities that lived along the River Volta. In 1962, plans were made to organize the resettlement of the communities to be affected. This took the joint effort of social workers, community leaders, and government.
One of the biggest concerns was the resettlement program, because once the dam was built and we started to impound water, the people who lived along the banks of the river had to be resettled, and they had to be counted. We had to look for areas where we were going to resettle them. The resettlement towns had to be designed. I've forgotten the number of towns that we built at the time. It was quite considerable. In fact, Mr. Kalitsi, who was in charge of the resettlement,
in 1963, I was assigned responsibility for resettlement of the people to be flooded. So that meant carrying out surveys, identifying those to be flooded, making plans. This I did. I set up a resettlement organization, recruited a lot of people from the universities as well as government agencies, coordinated the effort, and got the job done.
I was a child then when the construction started. My uncle was Nana Kwafo Akoto II. I understood everything that was going on. After consulting him, he gave them the land for the construction. He spoke to the people about how it's going to bring work and prosperity to the area. I remember very well at that time they used a canoe to cross the river to Agina to have dialogue with them about the impending flooding of the lands at Agina, Apaso and Pese. The people I used to see were Mr. Kalichi, former chief executive, Mr. Peter and others. Those days, there were no roads to Agina and other places, so they had to use canoes on the river. They went on these trips to persuade the people to move from their villages so as not to bring any misunderstandings.
Now, these people, incidentally, were occupying a vast area, 8,500 square kilometers. The villages were about, if my memory serves me right, about 738 or so villages, and the number was about 80,000. Today you can be mentioning these numbers, but it was a blank, and we had to ferret out all these, find out where the people were, what they were doing, what facilities they had. Frank Dobson, the chief executive, that it might become necessary for us to stop construction of the dam if we could not make proper arrangements for removing the people to be flooded. He instructed me to go and get that organized. And with the assistance of all these people, we found that there just wasn't time. So we decided, we managed to identify sites in consultation with the people. 52 sites were eventually agreed on.
I went to every village of the 52 resettlement areas. We were doing the clearing we were doing the farming for them to build their houses and all this. So I went through all these villages.
Basically, you know, these were small communities and villages that had to be brought together. One had to look at the social background to see whether they would work together. The chieftaincy issues came in, you know, how they were going to survive, farms.
Because we are farmers, the VRA acquired land around the village, farmlands across around the village, so that they can continue with their means of livelihood as before.
We went through laborious problem, identified what land would be suitable. We got soil scientists and agriculturists to identify these places for us.
It was quite complicated, right up to the day that we actually physically had to move these people, you see. So there were always bound to be differences, you know, based on our, you know, our system in Ghana and our culture in Ghana.
And remember that we had no roads going into the area. We flew by helicopter to some of the places. We went by boat where it was necessary. In fact, a lot of work was done by boat.
As the dam developed and the water, the lake started forming, then they found out that, you know, the way the lake was forming was going to affect a number of villages along the lake, along the river. And so it became necessary to plan to move those people. And I think the engineer at that time and the government, they had the foresight to work out a very strong and very effective rehabilitation program. And this program involved efforts in the sense that we had to fly items, supplies to airstrips that were built alongside the lake that was forming to the east of the lake.
We had social workers drawn from the Department of Social Welfare, located in zones, to live with the people and consult them, work with them, persuade them. It was a very messy job.
When the resettlement was almost completed and the water started to rise, Mr. Kalichi paid a surprise visit. I told him that I had visited the chiefs of Ohorobong and Krachi. The chiefs had decided not to move. I encouraged Kalichi to speak to Odeneho Kwafuakoto II about it because the chiefs at Ohorobong and Krachi had reverence and great respect for him.
We went ahead preaching the gospel that the river will rise from Akosombo and to submerge your villages, so you should get ready to leave your villages. The people were skeptical in those days because of, excuse me to say, of the degree of literacy. Many of them were illiterate, and they could not fathom how a dam from Akosombo will be built and it will affect them more than 100 miles away in Kitekrachi.
We had surveys made to identify who would be there, what kind of structures, housing structures they had, what facilities they had.
In 1962-63, when they actually came, the delegation, they said they were from VRA. But because of the water leak, they are constructing a dam for Ghana, and as such, our lands will be affected. So they will automatically they evacuate us from where we were staying. So they have come to make service. First, the first thing they did was numbering of our houses. they will ask you the number of children you have, who takes care of them. Maybe there is somebody in your house who maybe somebody is taking care of. They will ask you all that questions. So they put it on paper, they left. Then the third time they came was the time that they brought that pool I was talking about. The place is near the river, the Odedesu River. It's a very long distance, like it's like a tape, this thing, measuring tape, but that one was long. So they left. They told us we should be preparing and then leave the place because the water can come at any time. So we did not believe. We say, oh, how can the water go upwards?
Most of the settlers did not believe it was going to happen. We were children then. They found it difficult to leave all their farms and possessions behind. In fact, a lot of them did not want to relocate. This became a big problem for Nana Kwafu Okoto II. He did his best in reasoning with the people until they agreed to move.
I saw one of the elders whom I have gone there with one Mr. Salau to meet him. A very big village behind the left-hand side of the dam, called behind Fujuku. Then I went to the man, said, oh, have you forgotten that I came here with my boss to tell you that we are coming to do this and this and this, and you said you agree? I said, no way. You came to me and you didn't come to the people. The people said, no way, so you have to pack your things and go.
The belief was not there. All that we knew those days was that government says move, and you have to move.
And one of the chiefs was called the Dente Bosomtwe. He has been, every year when they're celebrating their festival, he will go in pomp with his ancient sword, because he was an old man. And with experience, I've seen that the river has been rising over the rise in the ebb of the river. It has never passed a certain point. So he will go and plant his ancient sword at that place and say, hey, you, Volta, if you rise up, don't go beyond this line. And in fact, the river never went beyond that line. Yes, from experience. But when I told them, oh, the river was coming to take your Rashi Chrome, the Bosomtwe said, oh, Miba, Jai, we have seen the river rise and rise over the years, so many years, it has never gone beyond this point. How can you, this small boy, come and tell us the river is going to cross the line? Eventually, the river crossed the line.
Some people were in the process of packing their belongings, but had very little time to do so because the river was flooding their lands and they had to leave everything behind.
Whilst this was going on, time was working against us. Even identification of the locations themselves was a problem.
And eventually, when the river started rising, the giant baobab tree, which was near Kachikrum in those days, which is even taller than my mango tree in my house, you can see that slowly, they got submerged.
Now you could see the river rising. And to be honest, when you saw the displaced families packed in state transport buses arriving in Akusumbo en route to their new communities, it was very disheartening.
All of a sudden, the water emerged. It will come from the ground. When you thought maybe the water is at the junction here, before we realize, you see that it comes from the hole. When we came, my father told me that we should start gathering our things and leave to the next village. So we have to cross the Dedesu before we go to the next village. So we started collecting our in the night. Even by then, my sisters, they were very young. So we have to carry them because there's a river you cross. They fell a tree and then you have to walk on the tree before you cross. So gradually, we send most of our things. But in fact, there are some animals that are very difficult. We could not lay hands on them. So we have to leave them in the water. If we were to follow them, we don't know what will happen because the water is still coming. So the very interesting thing in the night when we are in this thing, you hear people talking in the night as if people were coming from other places. But when you go out, you don't see the people.
Nana
Odenoho notified us that the construction of the dam was going to take our lands. He encouraged us not to be saddened by it. So we all knew that we will be losing our lands.
For one thing, no one knew where the limits of the lake would be because it was on paper. And even the maps were not adequate maps. But we had to make certain assumptions. And so what we decided was, having agreed with the people on the sites, we decided that we'd give the people the beginnings of houses in beginnings of towns.
So we gave everybody who was affected a kind of what we call in the VRA a nuclear house, to make sure that at least nobody was flooded out. Although the structures we provided were not sufficient, at least everybody has something.
These nuclear houses consisted of 2 rooms and a porch. But then we filled only 1 room. We had a roof and a floor for the 2 rooms and a porch in what we consider to be the beginning of a house. And then we had a scheme for those houses expanding continuously into what the normal Ghanaian compound plot. But that was only on paper.
The type of buildings given them were quite bad, so they used to bring lots of complaints about the size of rooms compared to the number of people in the family. But we always encouraged them to take it as it is and that one day everything will be all right. These families are living in the same properties presently.
We had a few houses of the type developed, and we tried as much as it was possible to match what the people owned to whatever we were going to give them.
When you saw the accommodation given them, it was very sad. Interestingly, those who lived in 1 room, the move was good for them. But the well-to-do villagers, the move disadvantaged them.
He came and put these houses for us, a single one, like this. When we came, the rooms were single. They told us that we should continue with the rest of this.
You couldn't get any work out of them on those houses, even though we had windows, doors, all ready for them. And we had demonstrated that within a period of 5 days, a family of 3 or so could complete those houses, because we had social welfare people also churning out landcrete blocks, which would be supplied to them.
Anyway, they provided us with frames and shutters. But the blocks, you have to provide yourself. And cement, they gave us cement. So you have to pay the masons and the carpenters who work on this thing till that was finished.
At the point where we had to evacuate the people, the only thing we could get ready was the beginnings of a house, which we gave them. And we were expecting that on arrival at the site, the people would be assisted to complete their houses and then do their farming. That one was a mistake. We found that at Akosombo to be a mistake because on arrival on the ground, the people were too demoralized.
But we started a lot of, we did poultry, we did piggery. You know, we were actually growing pigs for sale and poultry, you know, all as demonstration farms for the farmers. I mean, some of it took off, some of it naturally, you know, they were not interested.
The main problem we had was time. There was a race between construction of the dam and provision of facilities. Because you first of all have to know what the boundary of the lake would be before you could determine what the villages would be, the 738 villages which would be within. There was a time when almost the whole of Ghana's survey department was recruited by us to cut the lines to enable us to determine what the boundaries would be in places where the land was flat. Where we had steep land, that one you could make some rough assumptions. But where you had flat land, you wouldn't know how far the water would go. So you needed technical advice.
You know, when the water rises, it ends at 280 feet above sea level. And so we have to trace 280 above sea level. Wherever 280 passes on the ground, we have to trace it so that the road passes there. If you are in Akosombo, then they write letter to engineering that there are some places flooding. Come and check if it's under 280 or above 280. Then I'm saying there, go and check. You go and check if it's 280, above 280 or below 280. If it's below 280, they have to resettle those staying there.
They brought us here. They say, okay, they have accommodated us, but what we were promised is that they will be feeding us for 10 years, for which if we are matured, they can leave us. But what they will do is they will give us a piece of farming land so that we will be farming small to earn our living since we are farmers.
VRA did very well. They provided us with lots of things. Enjoy this new community. They also fed us for quite a while until they said that it was time for us to take care of ourselves. And also with regards to the land, they shared it amongst us. Everybody had 3 acres. Anyone above 17 years also had 3 acres.
After a certain period, you would do your calculation and find that, look, if you continue that at that rate, even in 10 years, you would not have completed demarcation, let alone start identifying the people or finding out what assets they had, or finding out what agricultural production was taking place in the area.
Let us turn our attention to some of the challenges faced by the communities to be resettled and the resettlement team.
When we came, in fact, it was very difficult. Even that day before we left the village, it is a very sad moment. I could even, by then our parents have a lot of cocoa farms, palm trees, oranges, coconut trees, and foodstuff were all destroyed.
We stay by the riverside and we are in abject poverty. We understand me? The crop, we had crop compensation. The crops that we were farming, I mean, depending on, had to be cut off and they were paid compensation. But for land and flood compensation, as I speak now, if my memory serves me right, and I think it's true, nothing has been paid.
In fact, we are having a lot of problems. Even as we come here, the little land that are allocated to us, all the time there was litigation. There are people who say even this place belongs to them, so we should leave the place. They open letters and petitions to VRA. We told them, people came here, they threatened us that we should leave the place. So but we don't know anybody. It was VRA who brought us here. So if you are telling me I should leave this place, I have no option than to go to VRA and tell them the people you put here, we don't want them, you come and take them. Or what they have to do is they should go and then get the water out of our land and send us back to the village, because when we are here, we are not happy at all. Our father, most of our fathers, they died. We are the only this thing. Surviving this thing. We died. And up till now, we are not enjoying. Even when we came here, no compensation was paid to neither our fathers or any of them.
Right now, we feel we are not being, we are not getting the full benefit of the lake. And we still feel blessed because we're always not going to get it full, but we feel very, very blessed.
Compensation had been paid to all of them, first in respect of the land which was acquired for their buildings and agriculture, and the crops which were on the land, because there could be a case where the title to the crops and the title to the land would not be the same. Maybe somebody hired the land and he's planted his crops on it. So you pay the money to the crop owner, not to the landowner, but the landowner will pay him compensation for his land.
When it came to actual payment, again, VRA disbursed the funds to either officers from the Lands Commission or Lands Department, or through lawyers who presented property valuation documents. If the amount was insufficient, it's up to society, in other words, up to the people, the lawyers, the land department people, to make representations depending on whatever the evaluation would have been.
In those days, when the Akosombo resettlers were complaining that VRA, what VRA gave to them was not to their taste or to their satisfaction, the government in those days set up a commission, the Olenu Commission. And when Olenu submitted its report, the report said that at least we should give them services and all those things. But there are people in the villages didn't like the idea. Some of them said, why? That village was for my was my father's village. My father owned the land. Why should I use the compensation money for the land to improve the township? You give the money to us, you chop it well. So because the people were not understanding the things, the government policy was that, oh, okay, we won't give the money to anybody. Establish a VRA resettlement trust fund. Every year, VRA will give you money. And those money to be given to you, you can use it to give them water, like internal roads, like electricity, and what have you. So that was how the VRA Resettlement Trust Fund was established.
I would say that by and large they got very nice townships, nicer houses from what they were living in before. They had the farming facilities for those who wanted to take the opportunity. And of course there were also many who felt that they ought to have had more.
Looking back at the Volta resettlement project after almost 50 years, despite all the support that government offered the resettled communities by way of better living conditions, well-planned communities with an organized governance structure, encouraging them to adopt effective agronomical practices to increase their yield, as well as offering them free land for farming, a number of the resettled people moved away from the resettlement townships, as they felt their social and cultural needs were not being met.
We have missed a glorious opportunity in Ghana because the resettlement was the brightest opportunity when people are willing to move from the old villages into the new ones, and we are preparing farmland for them. That was the glorious opportunity for the people to concentrate on their farming, but they didn't do it. Now we are using fertilizers. You can be cropping on the same acreage of land over the years, provided you use fertilizers, pesticides, and insecticides, which our people didn't understand. They are used to the shifting method of cultivation.
It was through this Volta resettlement work that the Afram Plains was opened. I remember when we were going to the Afram Plains first, Land Rovers were driving, got buried in mud, swallowed up in mud, and had to be excavated. It was a difficult job, but we had to accomplish the job, and it was done one way or the other. I give a lot of credit to colleagues who slaved through to achieve what we did on the resettlement front. Today, 50 years after, I know there are lots of criticisms, but we're dealing with an almost impossible situation.
The resettlement project merged 740 villages into 52 communities. However, lessons have been learnt, and when government embarked on the construction of another hydroelectric dam at Bong, the resettlement of the communities to be affected was better managed, taking into consideration all the failures of the Akosombo Dam project.